Imagine two people start the exact same job on the exact same day. Same desk, same salary, same manager, same first assignment. 5 years later, one of them has been promoted 3 times. The other one is still doing almost the same job, wondering why nothing ever seems to change for them. Same starting point, completely different outcome. So, what happened in between? That's the question we're going to dig into today, and I promise you, the answer is not the first person was smarter or the first person got lucky. It's something much more learnable than that, and much more within your control than you might think. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand exactly what makes some people almost impossible to replace at work, while others become, well, replaceable. And here's the part that matters most for you as an English learner. We're going to explore this idea using real, natural, B2 level English, the kind of language you'd actually hear if a thoughtful friend sat down with you over coffee and talked honestly about their career. No corporate jargon, no textbook phrases, just real talk, with a few useful expressions along the way that you can start using immediately. Let's be honest with each other for a second. Most of us have felt replaceable at some point. Maybe you've sat in a meeting and thought, anyone could do what I'm doing right now. Maybe you've watched a company go through layoffs and felt that cold, anxious feeling. What if that's me next time? That feeling is uncomfortable, but it's also incredibly common, and there's nothing wrong with you for having it. In fact, feeling replaceable is often less about your actual skills and more about not knowing which skills genuinely protect you in a fast-changing world. That's exactly what we're fixing today. The big idea: skills that can't be copied. Here's the core idea I want you to hold on to for this entire episode. In almost every industry today, technical knowledge is becoming easier and easier to copy. Think about it. 20 years ago, if you knew how to use a specific piece of software, that knowledge alone could get you a job and keep you employed for years. These days, someone can learn the basics of most software tools in a weekend using free videos online. Information itself has become cheap. It's everywhere, it's free, and it's not going anywhere. So, if pure knowledge is no longer rare, what actually makes someone valuable? The answer is what I like to call human depth. These are the qualities and abilities that are much harder to copy because they take time, self-awareness, and real experience to develop. Things like being able to read a difficult situation and know exactly how to respond. Being the person a team trusts to stay calm when everything is falling apart. Being able to connect ideas from completely different fields and come up with something genuinely new. These are the traits that make someone difficult to replace. And the exciting part is, every single one of them can be developed on purpose. Nobody is born with these abilities already fully formed. They are built slowly through specific habits and specific choices. Let me pause here for a moment and bring in a word that's going to come up a lot in this episode: irreplaceable. When we say someone is irreplaceable, we mean they are so valuable and unique in how they do their job that it would be extremely difficult, maybe even impossible, to find someone else who could do exactly what they do in exactly the same way. Now, take a second and try saying that word out loud, slowly. Irreplaceable. Notice where the stress falls, right in the middle of the word. Go ahead, pause the episode for a few seconds and repeat it 3 times. This kind of practice, saying new words out loud even when you're alone, is one of the fastest ways to make new vocabulary stick in your memory. Meet Elif and Thomas. Let me tell you about two people who are going to help us understand this idea more clearly. You've probably met Elif and Thomas before if you've listened to other episodes, but let me remind you who they are. Elif works in marketing for a mid-sized company, and Thomas works in a completely different field, IT support. But the two of them have known each other since university, and they still talk regularly about their careers, comparing notes, complaining sometimes, celebrating wins other times. They're a great example for us today because their stories show us two very different approaches to the same challenge. How do you make yourself valuable in a workplace where things are constantly changing? A few months ago, Elif's company went through a difficult period. The economy had slowed down, and management had to make some hard decisions about where to cut costs. Two people on Elif's team were let go. Elif told Thomas afterward that it was one of the most stressful weeks of her professional life. Not just because she was worried about her own job, but because she genuinely liked her colleagues and hated seeing them go through that. But here's the interesting part. When the decisions were made about who would stay and who would go, Elif's manager specifically mentioned her name as someone the team simply could not function without. Why? Not because she had the most years of experience, not because she had the fanciest job title. It was because of something much more specific, and we're going to break that down piece by piece in the next few minutes. Thomas, on the other hand, had a slightly different experience. He wasn't laid off, but he told Elif something that really stuck with her. He said, "Honestly, I think if I disappeared tomorrow, the company would just hire someone else, train them for 2 weeks, and nothing would really change." That's a hard thing to admit to yourself, isn't it? But Tomas's honesty is exactly what makes this story useful for us, because it shows the difference between doing a job competently and becoming genuinely difficult to replace. Doing your job well is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not automatically the same thing as being irreplaceable. Idea 1. The power of connecting dots others don't see. So, what exactly was Elif doing differently? Let's explore the first major idea, the ability to connect information from different areas in a way that creates real value. Elif didn't just do marketing tasks the way she was told to do them. Over time, she started noticing patterns. She noticed that customer complaints in the support department often matched trends she was seeing in social media comments about the product. Nobody had asked her to look at customer support data. That wasn't officially her job. But she started bringing this information to meetings, connecting dots that other people in separate departments simply weren't in a position to see because they were each focused only on their own small piece of the puzzle. This is such an important lesson, and I want you to really sit with it for a second. In most companies, information lives in separate boxes. The sales team knows things the marketing team doesn't know. The customer service team hears complaints that the product development team never hears directly. When you become the kind of person who moves between these boxes, who asks questions outside your immediate role, who genuinely gets curious about how the different parts of a business connect to each other, you start to see the whole picture. And people who can see the whole picture become incredibly valuable, because most people, quite honestly, are only looking at their own small corner of it. Let's bring in another useful expression here, to think outside the box. You've probably heard this phrase before. It's actually become a bit of a cliché in English, but it's still useful to understand. It means to think in a creative, unusual way, rather than following the normal, expected pattern. In other words, instead of only doing the tasks written in your job description, you start asking bigger questions. What if we tried this a different way? What if this problem in one department is actually connected to a problem in a completely different department? That kind of thinking is exactly what made Aleph stand out. Now here's a quick moment for you to practice. I want you to think about your own life for a second, whether that's your job, your studies, or even a hobby you're involved in. Can you think of one moment where you noticed a connection between two things that other people around you hadn't noticed? Maybe it was at work. Maybe it was in your family. Maybe it was something small. Take a moment, pause if you need to, and try to describe that situation out loud in English, even just in 1 or 2 sentences. Speaking your thoughts out loud, even to an empty room, genuinely strengthens your ability to access that vocabulary later when you need it in a real conversation. Idea 2. Emotional steadiness under pressure. Let's move to the second big idea, and this one might surprise you a little because it has almost nothing to do with technical skill. It's about emotional steadiness, or in simpler words, staying calm and clear-headed when things get difficult. When Elif's company was going through that stressful period of layoffs, there was a specific moment that her manager remembered clearly. A major client called with an urgent problem, right in the middle of all the chaos, when everyone else on the team was distracted, anxious, and honestly a bit panicked about their own job security. Elif was the one who picked up the phone, stayed calm, listened carefully to the client's frustration, and calmly worked through a solution, step by step. Here's the thing about staying calm under pressure. It's not that calm people don't feel stress. Elif told Thomas later that her heart was absolutely racing during that phone call. The difference is that she had trained herself over years not to let that internal panic control her outward behavior. And this brings us to a really useful word: composure. Composure means the state of being calm and in control of your emotions, especially in a difficult situation. She handled the crisis with remarkable composure, means she stayed calm and clear thinking, even though the situation was stressful. This is a word you'll often see in professional or formal English, so it's a great one to add to your vocabulary. Think about it this way. In any workplace, difficult moments are inevitable. Deadlines get moved up. Mistakes happen. Clients get upset. Technology breaks down at the worst possible time. The people who become genuinely trusted, the people managers think of first when something goes wrong, are almost never the people with the most technical knowledge. They're the people who don't fall apart when things get messy. If you can be the person who says, "Okay, let's figure this out," instead of the person who adds more panic to an already stressful situation, you become someone that others actively want on their team, in any project, in any crisis. Now, you might be wondering, can this actually be learned? Or are some people just naturally calmer than others? This is a fair question, and the honest answer is, it's both. But mostly, it's learnable. Psychologists who study stress and performance have found that our reaction to pressure is heavily influenced by practice and exposure. In other words, the more times you've faced a difficult situation and gotten through it, even imperfectly, the calmer your nervous system becomes the next time something similar happens. This connects to an idea from psychologist Carol Dweck, who studied what she called the growth mindset, the belief that our abilities, including emotional ones like patience and calmness, can actually improve with effort and practice, rather than being fixed traits we're simply born with or without. There's also a very practical, almost physical side to this that I think gets overlooked far too often. When we feel pressure, our bodies react before our minds even fully understand what's happening. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shorter and shallower, and your thinking, quite literally, becomes narrower and less flexible. This is sometimes called the fight or flight response, an old survival mechanism from a time when danger usually meant something physical, like an actual predator. The problem is, this same biological response gets triggered by a difficult email from your boss, or an awkward silence in a meeting, even though nothing physically dangerous is actually happening. One simple, almost embarrassingly basic trick that genuinely helps in these moments is slowing down your breathing on purpose, taking one slightly longer exhale before you respond to something stressful. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but that tiny pause is often exactly what separates a calm, thoughtful response from a reaction you might regret later. Let's do a quick speaking practice here. I want you to repeat this sentence out loud, slowly, focusing on your pronunciation. I might feel stressed, but I can still stay calm and think clearly. Say it one more time, a little faster this time. Notice the rhythm of the sentence, how the stress naturally falls on certain words like stressed, calm, and clearly. This kind of shadowing practice, repeating sentences with attention to rhythm and stress, is one of the most effective ways to improve your spoken English fluency over time. Idea 3. Becoming a source of trust, not just a task completer. Let's move to our third idea, and this one connects deeply to the first two. There's a real difference between being someone who completes tasks and being someone that other people trust. A task completer does exactly what they're asked, on time, correctly. That's genuinely valuable, don't misunderstand me, but it's also, unfortunately, quite replaceable because plenty of people can complete tasks correctly. A trusted person, though, is someone whose judgment other people rely on. Someone who gets included in conversations before decisions are made, not just after. Thomas actually gave us a great, honest example of this difference without even realizing it. He told Elif that his manager almost never asked for his opinion on bigger decisions, things like which software the team should switch to, or how a new project should be structured. Thomas was always told what to do, rather than being asked what he thought should be done. This isn't necessarily because Thomas lacked good ideas. It's because he hadn't yet built the kind of trust where his manager automatically thought, "I should ask Thomas about this before deciding." So how do you build that kind of trust? It starts with something surprisingly simple: consistency. Trust is built slowly, through hundreds of small moments where you do what you said you would do, where your word actually matches your actions. If you tell your manager you'll finish something by Thursday, and you consistently finish things by Thursday, over months and years that consistency becomes your reputation. On the other hand, if you occasionally overpromise and then deliver late, even if it happens rarely, people start to unconsciously build in a bit of doubt whenever they rely on you. Trust, once damaged, takes a surprisingly long time to rebuild, which is exactly why protecting it matters so much. There's a great phrase in English that captures this idea well: to walk the talk, sometimes said as walk the walk. It means to actually do what you say you're going to do, rather than just talking about your good intentions. She doesn't just talk about hard work. She walks the talk, means her actions genuinely match her words. This is such a valuable expression to know, because you'll hear it often in professional and even casual conversations in English. Let's bring in a philosophical idea here that connects beautifully to this point. The Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius, who was also an emperor, wrote something in his private journal that has survived for almost 2,000 years. He said that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. What does this have to do with trust at work? Well, think about it this way. So many of us avoid taking on more responsibility because we imagine failure before it even happens. We imagine our manager being disappointed. We imagine looking incompetent in front of colleagues. And that imagined fear stops us from stepping up in the first place. But Marcus Aurelius's point is that most of that fear exists only in our heads, long before, and often instead of, anything actually going wrong. Here's another small practice moment for you. I want you to imagine a situation at your own workplace or your studies where you could take on a little more responsibility than you currently do. Maybe it's offering to lead a small part of a project. Maybe it's speaking up in a meeting instead of staying quiet. Now, try saying this sentence out loud. Next time, I'm going to speak up, even if I'm a little nervous. Say it again, this time with more confidence in your voice. Notice how even just saying a sentence like this out loud can shift how you feel about actually doing it. A small story of change. Let me go back to Elif and Thomas for a moment, because there's a really encouraging part of this story that I haven't told you yet. After that difficult period at Elif's company, Thomas actually called her, feeling a bit shaken by what he'd witnessed happen to his colleagues. He asked her directly, "How did you become the person they couldn't lose?" And Elif's answer was honestly refreshing, because she didn't say anything about talent or luck. She said, "I just started asking more questions than I needed to, and I started showing up for the hard moments instead of hiding from them." That single sentence contains almost everything we've talked about today. Asking more questions than necessary is exactly what led her to connect information across departments, the skill we discussed in our first idea. Showing up for hard moments is exactly what built her reputation for composure under pressure, our second idea. And doing both of these things consistently over a long period of time is exactly what built the trust we talked about in our third idea. None of it happened overnight. Elif had been building these habits quietly for years, long before anyone was watching closely enough to notice. Thomas, to his credit, didn't just feel sorry for himself after that conversation. A few weeks later, he told Elif that he'd started doing something small but meaningful. At the end of every week, he began writing down one moment where he could have spoken up more, or asked a better question, or stayed calmer under pressure. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It was small, quiet, consistent reflection. And here's something worth remembering. Small, consistent actions like this are almost always more powerful than big, dramatic changes that don't last. This idea actually connects closely to the concept of the compound effect. something we've explored in other episodes on this podcast. The idea that tiny, repeated actions build up over time into results that look, from the outside, almost impossible to achieve quickly. What I find especially encouraging about Thomas's story is how ordinary it actually was. He didn't quit his job to completely reinvent himself. He didn't sign up for an expensive course or read 20 books in a month. He simply started paying closer attention to his own behavior, one small notebook entry at a time. About 4 months later, he mentioned something to Elif almost casually, the way you would mention any small piece of good news. His manager had asked his opinion on a decision for the very first time, about which vendor the company should switch to for a particular tool. It wasn't a huge moment in the grand scheme of things. Nobody threw a party. But for Thomas, it was proof that the small, quiet work he'd been doing was actually being noticed, even though he hadn't been doing it in order to be noticed. He'd simply been doing it to become someone he respected a little more. And the recognition from others turned out to be a natural side effect of that inner change, rather than the goal itself. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because I think many of us fall into the trap of chasing recognition directly, hoping someone will notice our effort and reward us for it. But real, lasting value tends to work the other way around. You build the underlying quality first, quietly and consistently, and the recognition tends to follow naturally, often later than you'd like, but more solidly than if you'd chased it directly from the beginning. Idea 4. Becoming genuinely adaptable. Let's move into our fourth idea. And this one is especially important in the world we're living in right now, where change happens faster than at almost any other point in history. Adaptability is the ability to adjust comfortably when circumstances change, rather than resisting change or feeling completely lost when it happens. Companies today change direction constantly. New tools appear, old processes disappear, entire industries shift because of new technology. The people who thrive in this environment aren't necessarily the smartest people in the room. They're the people who can say, "Okay, this is different now. Let me figure out how to work with it," instead of, "This isn't how we used to do things." I want to introduce a useful phrasal verb here, to roll with the punches. This expression originally comes from boxing, where a fighter learns to move their body slightly when they get hit, which reduces the impact of the punch. In everyday English, it means to adapt easily to difficult or unexpected situations without getting too upset or thrown off balance. When the project plan changed completely at the last minute, she just rolled with the punches and figured out a new approach. Isn't that a wonderfully visual expression? You can really picture the boxer moving with the hit instead of standing rigid and taking the full force of it. Fear of change is actually one of the most natural human responses there is, and there's a scientific reason for that. Our brains are wired to prefer certainty because, from an evolutionary perspective, uncertainty used to be genuinely dangerous. But here's the encouraging part. Adaptability, just like emotional steadiness, is a skill you can deliberately practice. One simple way to build it is by intentionally putting yourself in small situations of change on a regular basis. Try a slightly different route to work. Try a new way of organizing your tasks for a week. Volunteer for a small project outside your comfort zone. These small, low-risk practices with change build up your tolerance for it, so that when bigger, less controllable changes eventually happen, and they will, you're not facing that kind of discomfort for the very first time. Let's do another quick speaking practice. Repeat this phrase slowly. I can roll with the punches. Now say it again, a bit faster, with natural rhythm. Try using it in your own sentence about a change you've experienced recently. Even a small one. For example, you might say, "My schedule changed suddenly last week, but I just rolled with the punches." Go ahead and try creating your own version of that sentence out loud right now. Idea 5. Investing in yourself like a long-term project. Our fifth and final main idea is really the foundation underneath everything else we've discussed today. It's the habit of continuous learning, treating your own development almost like a long-term personal project that never really finishes. Here's an uncomfortable but honest truth. The skills that make you valuable today will probably not be exactly the same skills that make you valuable in 10 years. Industries evolve, tools change, and what's considered cutting-edge today can become outdated surprisingly quickly. Elif, interestingly, wasn't someone who spent hours every single day studying new skills. That's actually an important thing to clarify, because sometimes we imagine that successful, valuable people are working 18-hour days, constantly improving themselves, and that's simply not realistic or sustainable for most people. What Elif did instead was much smaller and much more consistent. She spent about 20 minutes most evenings reading articles or watching short videos related to her field, and roughly once a month, she'd have a genuine conversation with someone from a completely different department, just to understand a little more about how their part of the business worked. This connects beautifully to an idea from the book Atomic Habits, which many of you listening probably already know. The central idea there is that we dramatically overestimate what we can achieve in a single day, but we just as dramatically underestimate what we can achieve over a year, or several years, through small, consistent actions repeated regularly. 20 minutes a day sounds almost too small to matter, but 20 minutes a day, repeated across 5 years, adds up to hundreds and hundreds of hours of learning. Learning that most of your colleagues who aren't doing this consistently simply won't have. Here's a word worth adding to your vocabulary: proactive. Being proactive means taking action and making changes before you're forced to, rather than simply reacting after something has already happened. Instead of waiting for her skills to become outdated, she proactively learned new tools every year. Is a great example of how this word is used. The opposite would be reactive, only responding after a problem has already appeared, which is often too late to prevent real damage. Listener reflection. Let's slow down for a moment now and turn this conversation toward you directly. I want you to genuinely think about 3 questions, and I'd encourage you to say your answers out loud, even if you're alone right now, because speaking your thoughts helps you process them more deeply, and it's fantastic practice for your English at the same time. First question. Think about your own workplace, or your studies, or really any group you're part of. If you disappeared tomorrow, what specifically would be missing? Would it be a particular skill, a particular way you handle problems, a particular kind of trust people have in you? Take a moment and really think about this honestly. Second question. Which of the 5 ideas we discussed today, connecting dots across different areas, staying calm under pressure, building trust through consistency, being adaptable to change, or continuously learning, do you think is your strongest quality right now? And just as importantly, which one do you think needs the most work? Third question, and this one is a bit more personal. What's one small, low-risk way you could start practicing that weaker skill this week? Not next year, not someday, but genuinely this week. Remember, we're not looking for a dramatic transformation here. We're looking for something small enough that you'll actually do it. Let's bring everything together now. We started this episode by imagining two people who begin their careers at exactly the same point, and we asked why their paths end up so different. The answer, as we've discovered together, has very little to do with luck or natural talent, and almost everything to do with 5 specific, learnable habits: connecting information across different areas, staying emotionally steady under pressure, building genuine trust through consistency, adapting comfortably when things change, and treating your own growth as an ongoing, lifelong project, rather than something you finish once and forget about. I want you to notice something important here, something that connects directly to your English learning journey too, because, honestly, this entire podcast episode is a small demonstration of everything we've just talked about. You showed up today. You stayed with me through a full episode in your second, third, maybe even fourth language. That itself is proactive. That itself is continuous learning. That itself is exactly the kind of small, consistent action that, repeated over months and years, quietly transforms into fluency you'll one day look back on with real pride. So take a second, right now, to genuinely acknowledge that. You're already practicing exactly what we discussed today, just in a different area of your life. Here's a short thought I want to leave with you before we wrap up. Becoming difficult to replace isn't really about becoming the loudest person in the room, or the one with the most impressive title, or even the one who works the longest hours. It's about becoming someone whose absence would genuinely be felt, someone whose particular combination of skills, calmness, curiosity, and consistency simply can't be easily copied by someone else. And the beautiful thing is, that version of you is built one small, ordinary day at a time, not through one dramatic moment of brilliance. This week's challenge. Here's your challenge for this week, and I've made it deliberately simple, because simple challenges are the ones people actually complete. Choose just one of the 5 ideas we discussed today, whichever one felt most relevant to you, and practice it once, just once, in a real situation this week. Maybe you'll ask one extra question in a meeting to connect 2 ideas that seem unrelated. Maybe you'll notice yourself staying calm in a small, stressful moment and consciously appreciate that. Whatever you choose, keep it small and specific. And if you feel comfortable, share what you tried in the comments below. I genuinely read them, and I'd love to know which idea resonated most with you today. Community question. Here's my specific question for you this week. Think of one person in your life, at work, at school, anywhere, who you would describe as genuinely difficult to replace. Without naming them, if you'd rather keep it private, tell me in the comments, what is the one specific quality that makes them so hard to replace? Is it their calmness, their trustworthiness, their ability to connect ideas, something else entirely? I'm really curious to read your answers, and I think we can all learn something valuable from each other's observations. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Remember, The goal was never to become perfect overnight. The goal is simply to become 1% more difficult to replace than you were yesterday, in whatever way matters most for your own life and your own goals. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, take care of yourself and keep going.